Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be with you all here today. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about how I came to write my novel, Girls Run Brighter, and how in the writing of it, I came to understand something about the world, something essential about the world, and maybe even something essential about what it means to be a human being. So in order to do that, I would have to go back a little bit to the year 1999. And that is the year when I first put pen to paper. That's the year when I decided I would be a writer. I had gone to law school, I had a bachelor's in engineering, but I'd always wanted to write. And that was the year. So in 1999, I started writing a novel. It took about 3 or 4 years, and I did what writers do. I sent it out into the world. Sent it to agents, publishers, editors, and they started coming back, the rejections. I had a pile of them. And so I dusted myself off, started a second novel. Again, 3 or 4 years, and again, I sent it out. Pile of rejections, once again. Third novel, same thing. By this point, I had enough rejections to wallpaper my entire apartment. And by now, by the way, it's 2014. 15 years have gone by, and I've only really figured out one thing, which is the best thing to do, actually, is to write short stories, because those you can submit to smaller literary journals and magazines and have perhaps a better chance of getting published. So that is what I started doing, and that led me to the dream coming true, the dream of all writers, which is a book contract. So in 2014, I got a book contract. They had 2 stipulations. The first was the publication of the short story collection, right? And that's called An Unrestored Woman. The second was that I would write a novel. And I thought, great, I got this. I can write a novel. And in fact, I also knew what I wanted the novel to be about. I wanted it to be about 2 girls growing up in a small South Indian village, and I'm South Indian. And I wanted one of them to be trafficked into the United States. And I wanted her friend to set out to find her. Both of them, by the way, are incredibly impoverished, without resources, and uneducated. So that was the novel. And so I opened up my laptop, because by now it's no longer pen and paper, it's a computer. I opened up my laptop, I'm staring at the blank screen. Nothing. I could not put down a single word. And I knew what was wrong. I thought, all these years, this is the moment I've worked for. It took so long, and I've sacrificed so much, and I want to write the perfect thing. I want to write the timeless thing that will endure. So, staring at the blank screen, I'm eking out like a sentence or 2, sometimes a paragraph or 2, sometimes 20, 30 pages, deleting every single time. Dozens of false starts. By this point, of course, the clock is ticking, because I've been given a year to write this novel, by the way. And so I just slam something out. I mean, I'm just like, let's just plow through this. I slam it out, I submit it to my editor, who's kind of waiting for it. And she gets on the phone, and she's like, no. No, this novel is not going to do it. And I knew it. I knew it was mediocre at best. And she told me as much. And she said to me, here's what we're gonna do. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you another year. And what I want you to do is I want you to go out and write me a great novel. But no pressure. So I was like, okay. Go back, the blank screen. But at this point, I am having a full-blown existential crisis. I'm wondering, do I know how to write a novel? Do I know what a novel is? Have I ever written one? Am I even a writer? I mean, we're talking utter breakdown. Also around this time, I meet a friend of mine for dinner. And he says to me, just offhandedly, we're talking about my crisis, and offhandedly he says, oh, by the way, my mom has just bought a piece of property outside the Badlands National Park. How many of you have been to the Badlands? Fantastic. Okay, so he says to me, she's bought this piece of property, and we, just the previous week, had put up a cabin on this property. And so he says to me, do you happen to know anyone who'd like to go out there? Maybe for a weekend, a long weekend. And I was like, this is it. This is my only chance. So I look at him and I say, I do know somebody who wants to go out to the Badlands, but I would like to stay for 2 months. And he said, no. He said, no, it is far too isolated. For a woman alone, that could be incredibly dangerous. The closest town is a couple of miles away and has a population of 47 people. But you see, I didn't have a choice. And so I told him, I said, I have to go out there. And so I convinced him, and I went to the Badlands of South Dakota. For those of you who don't know, the Badlands is on the southwestern corner of South Dakota. I had to look it up. I did not know where I was going. So I get to the Badlands, I get to this cabin, and immediately I noticed 2 things. The first is the silence. I had never in all of my life known a silence that profound. It was so utter and so complete that if a bird happened to fly by the cabin, I could hear the flap of its wings from inside the cabin. If it happened to chirp when it flew by, I would begin to weep with gratitude, because sound is life. And I yearned for life, any sign of life out there. It was that quiet. The second thing I noticed was probably on the 3rd or 4th evening. I go out to this little porch that's attached to the cabin, and I look to the west, and over the Black Hills, which are about an hour's drive from my cabin, there is this massive bank of dark, ominous clouds. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, it'll dissipate by the time it gets here. So as the storm is racing towards my cabin, not at all dissipating, looking like it's actually gaining strength, I figure out something very quickly, and that is that this cabin, and my friend had neglected to tell me this cabin is not anchored to the ground. It is just sitting on a tractor trailer bed, which is how they'd managed to put it up in a week. So the storm slams into my cabin with 80-mile-an-hour winds, thunder, hail, and lightning. It was apocalyptic. This cabin shook as if like a kid was shaking a snow globe. And I was just crouched in the corner. I thought I would never make it alive. I have never been that afraid of anything in all of my life, that storm. But it wasn't an isolated storm. These storms would come 2, 3, 4 times a week. So there I am, silence, broken only by storm and a blank computer screen. And since I'm not writing, I start looking around and sort of thinking about what's around me. Here is the first thing that's around me. This is the view from my front windows of my cabin. This is called the Badlands Wall, and it's a rock formation. So I start researching it. It came to be, I should say, 500,000 years ago, which is nothing in geologic time, right? And it is eroding at the rate of 1 inch per year, so that in 500,000 years from now, it's estimated, it will be gone. Here is, again, 1 million years is nothing in geologic time. Here is a two-tailed swallowtail, ubiquitous in the Badlands. In this stage, in its adult stage, it lives for 6 to 14 days. In those 6 to 14 days, it will reproduce, it will pollinate, and it will die. 6 to 14 days. This is the last thing I see, or what I will tell you about. This guy, his ear tag said 194. So I'm just gonna call him number 194. So as you can see, there's a fence. On this side is the cabin, on the other is grazing land. And every couple of days, this herd of cows would come by, and they'd munch on the grass, hang out, and then they'd keep moving. And every time they did, I would run out onto the porch. And I would like wave to them because I was so starved for company. And I could never leave the porch because the cattle would get scared and they'd back up. So I had to stay on my porch and they would carry on and then move on. Except for number 194. He always stayed, it's probably a he always stayed about, because otherwise it's a dairy cow, right? And they don't, anyway. He always stayed 5 minutes, maybe 10, 20 minutes longer than the rest of the herd. And I wondered why, and then I knew why. He could sense my loneliness. He could sense my fear. He could sense that I needed a friend. You may not believe me, but I know it. I know it like I have never known anything else. So, number 194. I see all of this around me, and I go back into the cabin. I open up the laptop, and I begin to write. And you may ask, what changed? What changed? Well, let's start with number 194. I think we all know what he was being raised for, right? So he is probably no longer with us. But in the short time that we were acquainted, he kept me company. And for that, I will always, forever be grateful. Because he offered me his friendship. The two-tailed swallowtail. In 6 to 14 days, It seeded our world. It spread a sweetness that will give us fruit. And then it died. In 6 to 14 days, it did that for us. And the Badlands Wall, I thought, gosh, it'll be gone in 500,000 years. And yet, it has a majesty. It insists on its own beauty, even as it erodes. And I thought, you don't have to write something perfect. You don't have to write something timeless. You have to write something that befriends one reader. That one reader will close the last page and feel their life illuminated in some way. You have to just write a book that one reader finds deepens their sense of humanity or makes them kinder. That's all you have to do. And in 2 months, I had the first draft of the book, which actually is very close to the final draft of the book. It actually didn't even change that much from where I wrote it in the Badlands. And every day I carry with me that thing that I came to understand, that now flows in my veins, and that is that nothing endures. Nothing does. And maybe nothing should endure. But how much we put into it, how much heart we put into it, that is the measure of our lives. There may be, in fact, no other measure of our lives. Thank you.